The rope creaked against the cottonwood branch as the girl's feet kicked air, her face turning purple under the desert moon while the crowd cheered, "Justice served." 8 years of solitude had taught Eli Mercer to mind his own business, to let the world burn beyond his fence line. But when those desperate feet suddenly went still, and the crowd began to disperse, something ancient stirred in his chest. The knife was in his hand before conscience could object, cutting through hemp, as her body dropped into his arms, and in that moment, when her lungs gasped back to life against his chest, the rancher who'd sworn off caring discovered that some refusals cost more than compliance ever could. If you're watching from anywhere between Texas and California, drop your town's name below. I want to know how far this story of courage travels. The crowd's roar died to whispers as Boots shuffled away from the hanging tree, satisfied that frontier justice had been served. Eli Mercer stood in the shadows beyond the torchlight, his weathered hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. The girl Apache by her features, barely 20 by his reckoning, swayed from the cottonwood's lowest branch, and Sheriff Brackett was already turning away, wiping his hands clean of another thief's blood. "Leave her till mornin'," Brackett called to his deputies. "Let the buzzards have their say about horse thieves." The words sparked laughter from the remaining crowd, ugly sounds that carried across Ash Mesa's dusty main street. Eli counted heartbeats 1, 2, 3 as the last of the townspeople filed back toward the saloons and their warm beds. The girl's body twisted slowly in the wind, and he saw it, then the almost imperceptible rise of her chest, the slightest tremor in her bound hands. "She's alive!" The knife came free from his belt with practiced silence, the same blade that had skinned 1,000 rabbits and carved fence posts for 8 solitary years. His boots made no sound crossing the packed earth, a skill learned in another life, in another kind of war. The rope was new, hemp government issued, and it parted under his blade like wheat before a scythe. Her body dropped hard into his arms, heavier than he'd expected, and her head lolled back to reveal the angry rope burn already swelling around her throat. But there, a rasp of air, precious and desperate, flooding back into crushed airways. "Easy," he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "Easy does it." The weight of her pressed against his chest as he lifted her, properly, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. 8 years since Martha died. 8 years since he'd held another human being this close, and here he was, cradling a stranger who smelled of sage, smoke, and fear sweat. Moving through Ash Mesa's back alleys required every shadow, every blind corner he'd mapped in his mind during his monthly supply runs. The town slept drunk on its own righteousness windows, dark except for the glow from the Broken Wheel Saloon, where Brackett's men would drink until dawn. A dog barked somewhere to his left. Eli froze, feeling the girl's pulse flutter against his forearm like a trapped bird. The animal settled after a moment, and he continued his careful navigation toward where his wagon waited beyond the livery stable. "You picked a hell of a time to breathe," he muttered, settling her into the wagon bed among the flour sacks and wire rolls he'd purchased that morning, back when his biggest concern was replacing fence posts before the winter winds came. The ride back to his ranch took 2 hours through darkness so complete that only the stars and his horse's memory kept them on the rutted trail. The girl moaned once, a sound that made his shoulders tense, but she didn't wake. He could feel her fever through the blanket he'd wrapped around her, infection setting in already, from the trauma, from the hours she'd hung before the crowd's bloodlust was satisfied. His cabin sat lonely on the rise, a small fortress of hand-hewn logs that had weathered 8 winters of his self-imposed exile. Inside, he laid her on his own bed, the first time anyone but him had occupied it since Martha's death. Working by lamplight, he cut away the rope still embedded in her wrists, revealing raw wounds that would scar if she lived long enough. The temple cut was worse than he'd thought, a gash from where someone's rifle butt had put her down before the hanging. He cleaned it with whiskey from his medicinal supply, watching her face contort even in unconsciousness. The stove needed feeding, so he built the fire up until the cabin grew warm enough to chase the high desert chill from her bones. "What's your name?" he asked the unconscious form, not expecting an answer, but her lips moved just slightly, and a word escaped like smoke: Sahela. The name hung in the air between them, Apache syllables that meant something about high places, about eagles maybe. He'd known enough Apache scouts during the range wars to recognize the language, though the specifics escaped him. "Well, Sahele," he said, wringing out another cloth in the basin of hot water, "you've got about 6 hours before they realize you're gone. Then Sheriff Brackett's going to tear this county apart looking for you." Her eyes fluttered open, then dark alert, despite the pain taking in everything from his face to the exits to the rifle mounted above the door. She didn't try to speak, but her hand moved to her throat, feeling the damage there. "Don't," Eli said. "Your windpipe's bruised bad. Talking will make it worse." She nodded, once economical with even that small movement, and he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been broken by the noose or the crowd's hatred, a kind of steel that recognized its own kind. "They'll come," she managed to whisper the words like sandpaper. "Let 'em," Eli replied, and meant it. Dawn came pale and unforgiving, bringing with it the circling shadows of buzzards overhead. They'd come for a meal at the hanging tree and found it empty, so now they traced lazy circles above Eli's ranch, as if they knew death had merely been postponed rather than prevented. From his porch, Eli could see the dust trails, beginning riders fanning out from town in search parties, checking every homestead, every canyon where a wounded Apache girl might hide. It wouldn't take them long to reach his place. He'd made no secret of leaving town late, and someone would remember, someone always remembered. Sahali stood beside him despite his protests that she should rest. She'd wrapped herself in one of Martha's old shawls he'd never had the heart to burn, and she watched the approaching riders with the same calm that a deer shows before it bolts. "There's a root cellar," Eli said quietly, "under the kitchen boards. You could—" "No." The word came out stronger than her damaged throat should have allowed. "No more hiding." He looked at her, then really looked at her. The swelling around her throat had turned purple-black, but she stood straight, unbowed. Her fingers traced something on her palm, an old scar he hadn't noticed before, shaped like a brand. "Not my first rope," she whispered, catching his glance. Before he could ask what she meant, the lead rider crested the ridge. Even at distance, Eli recognized Sheriff Brackett's black hat and the arrogant way he sat his horse. 4 men rode with him, deputies, with their hands already resting on their pistols. "Get inside," Eli said, but Sahal shook her head. "They need to see me alive. Otherwise, they'll burn you out just to be sure." There was strategy in that, cold and practical. Eli respected it, even as it made his trigger finger itch. He walked out to meet them at his fence line, making them stop short of his property, a small insistence on boundaries that meant everything and nothing. "Morning, Sheriff," Eli called out, his voice carrying the forced casualness of a man with nothing to hide. Brackett didn't dismount, looking down from his horse with eyes like chips of flint. "Mercer, heard you left town late last night. Supply run took longer than expected. Henderson's boy helped me load the wagon." "Funny thing," Brackett said, not smiling. "That Apache thief we hung yesterday, body's gone missing. Coyotes, probably, or those buzzards." Eli gestured at the circling birds. "You leave meat out, something's going to take it." One of the deputies shifted in his saddle. "Sheriff, that's her, on the porch." Every gun cleared leather in the same instant. 5 weapons trained on the small figure standing in the doorway of Eli's cabin. Sahele didn't flinch, didn't raise her hands. She simply stood there, wrapped in a dead woman's shawl, letting them see what they'd failed to kill. "Well, hell," Brackett said softly, and there was something almost like admiration in it. "You always were a hard one to put down, weren't you?" That's when Eli understood this wasn't their first encounter. Sahele's old scar, her recognition of the sheriff's methods, it all pointed to a history that ran deeper than a simple horse theft. "She's under my protection," Eli said, stepping between the guns and the porch. "My land, my rules." Brackett laughed ugly and short. "Your protection, Mercer. You've been hiding out here so long you've forgotten how things work. That woman's a condemned thief. Interfering with justice will see you hang beside her." "What horse?" Eli asked suddenly. "What horse did she steal?" The question caught Brackett off guard just for a moment, but Eli saw it, the flicker of calculation, the quick glance between the deputies. "The preacher's mare," one of the younger deputies supplied. "Strawberry roan with a white blaze." "Interesting," Eli said slowly, "because I saw that mare in Henderson's corral this morning when I passed. Seemed healthy enough for a stolen horse that was supposedly ridden to Mexico." The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Sahele moved, then just slightly coming to stand beside Eli rather than behind him. When she spoke, her damaged voice carried surprising strength. "Wasn't the horse they wanted to hang me for?" Brackett's hand tightened on his pistol grip. "Shut your mouth, thief." "The surveyor?" She continued, each word fighting past her injured throat. "Federal man, Barnes, he had papers." "You're delirious," Brackett said quickly. Too quickly. The noose scrambled your brains. Eli felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, like cartridges sliding into a cylinder. A federal surveyor gone missing, a horse that was never really stolen, and a patchy woman who knew too much about something. "Here's what's going to happen," Brackett said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You're going to step aside, Mercer. We're going to finish what we started yesterday, and you're going to forget this ever happened, or you'll find yourself remembering it from the wrong end of a rope." "No," Eli said simply. The word hung there like a challenge, like a match near a powder keg. One of the deputies, older, more experienced, shook his head slightly, recognizing what was about to happen. But Brackett was already too far down this path to back up. "Boy," the sheriff said to his youngest deputy, "ride back to town. Bring everyone. We're going to have us another hanging, 2 for the price of 1 this time." As the rider wheeled his horse around and spurred toward Ash, Mesa Sahele's fingers found Eli's sleeve. Not grasping, just touching a connection between two people about to make a stand. "Still want my protection?" Eli asked quietly. She nodded, and in that moment, with buzzards circling overhead and death approaching on horseback, something passed between them. Not romance, nothing as simple as that, but recognition. 2 damaged souls choosing to face the storm together rather than weather it alone. "Then get inside," he said. "Check under the kitchen boards, not for hiding, for supplies." She understood immediately, moving with purpose despite her injuries. Eli kept his eyes on Brackett, watching the man's growing frustration at this unexpected resistance. "You've got maybe 2 hours before that boy brings back a mob," Brackett said. "You really want to die for some Apache horse thief?" "Funny thing about dying," Eli replied, his hand finally resting on his own pistol. "Done right, it only happens once. But living wrong, that happens every damn day." The sheriff's face darkened, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He had time on his side, or thought he did. What he didn't know was what Sahele was pulling up from beneath Eli's kitchen floor, remnants from the range wars, from a time when Eli went by a different name and did things that kept him awake even now, 8 years into his penance. "We'll wait," Brackett announced, settling back in his saddle. "Boys, spread out, cover all the exits. Our friend Mercer's about to learn what happens when you stand against the law in Ash Mesa." As the deputies took their positions, Eli allowed himself a grim smile. The law, as if what Brackett represented had anything to do with justice. But that was fine. Eli had stopped believing in justice the day Martha died. All he believed in now was refusal, the simple, stubborn refusal to let wrong things happen just because they were easy. Behind him he heard Sahele, heard the soft clink of metal on metal. She was finding his cash, the tools of his former trade. The buzzards continued their patient circles overhead, and the sun climbed higher, promising a hot day ahead. "Hey, Mercer," Brackett called out. "That Apache, she tell you what she was really doing with that horse?" Eli didn't answer, but he listened. "Federal surveyor named Barnes went missing 2 weeks back. Had papers about land disputes, mineral rights. The kind of papers that could upset the whole county's arrangements. Next day she's riding his horse, bold as brass. What do you think happened to Barnes?" "I think," Eli said carefully, "that a federal surveyor's disappearance would bring federal marshals. Unless someone made sure it looked like Apache raiders. Unless someone needed a convenient scapegoat." The truth of it hung in the air like dust after a stampede. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably, and Eli filed that away. Not all of Brackett's men were true believers. Sahele emerged from the cabin then, and what she carried made Brackett's men straighten in their saddles. Dynamite, old but still good, the kind used for blasting mine shafts and occasionally for more violent purposes. "Found your cash," she said to Eli, her voice stronger now, as if the prospect of a fight had given her strength. "Interesting reading material down there, too. Newspaper clippings about a range war detective named Cooper. Looks just like you if you were 8 years younger." Eli winced. He'd meant to burn those clippings, but somehow never had. Martha had collected them, proud of what he'd been before he'd become just hers. "Cooper's dead," he said flatly. "Maybe," Sahele agreed, "but his skills aren't." She set the dynamite on the porch rail, deliberate and visible. The message was clear: this wouldn't be a simple siege. That's when they heard it, distant but growing closer, the rumble of many horses. The boy had made good time, and half of Ash Mesa was coming to finish what they'd started. The mob wanted its blood, and Sheriff Brackett would give it to them. But as Eli watched Sahele position herself at his left side, covering his weak angle without being asked, he realized something had changed. For 8 years he'd been dead inside, going through the motions of living without any real purpose beyond the next sunrise. Now, with death approaching in a cloud of dust and anger, he felt more alive than he had since Martha's burial. "Inside," he said quietly, "both of us. We make our stand from cover." As they moved back into the cabin, Sahele touched that scar on her palm again, a gesture he was beginning to recognize as her tell something she did when remembering pain. "Not my first rope," she said again, and this time she continued. "Brackett's brother Caleb branded me 5 years ago. Said it would remind me who owned this territory. I got away that time, but the scar stayed." "Caleb Brackett," Eli repeated the name, stirring memories. "The range war enforcer. Thought he was dead." "Men like that don't die," Sahele said grimly. "They just move to new territories. He's been back for months, running things from shadows while his brother plays sheriff." The dust cloud was visible now, perhaps 30 riders, maybe more. The good citizens of Ash Mesa coming to see justice done. Eli checked his rifle. His pistol counted ammunition. Not enough for a sustained fight, but maybe enough to make it costly. "Why'd you take the horse?" he asked, needing to understand what he was about to die for. Sahele's dark eyes met his, unflinching. Barnes wasn't just a surveyor. He was investigating land grabs, forged titles, murdered homesteaders, had a ledger full of evidence. "I tried to warn him, but Caleb's men got to him first. I took the horse because it was carrying his papers. Thought I could get them to the territorial marshal." "Did you?" She shook her head. "But Brackett's men caught me first. They got most of the papers, but not all." She pulled something from inside her shirt, a folded, water-stained page, covered in tight handwriting. "This is what they killed him for. Proof that the preacher, the sheriff, and half the town council have been stealing land from dead homesteaders." Eli took the paper, scanning it quickly. Names, dates, amounts, a careful accounting of murder dressed up as legal transaction. His own name wasn't on it, but only because he'd never had anything worth stealing except isolation. "This is worth dying for," he said, not a question. "Only if it gets out. Only if someone knows." The mob was close enough now that they could hear individual voices, angry and eager. Eli saw torches despite the daylight. They meant to burn him out if necessary. "There's another way," he said suddenly. "You slip out the back, take my horse, ride hard for the territorial capital. I'll hold them here." Sahaley actually smiled then, an expression that transformed her battered face. 8 years alone made you forget how partnerships work. Before he could respond, Sheriff Brackett's voice boomed out, amplified by the mob's presence. "Eli Mercer, you've got 1 minute to send out the Apache, or we're coming in." Eli looked at Sahaley, this stranger who'd dropped into his life barely 12 hours ago, and somehow made him remember why standing for something mattered more than standing alone. "Partners, then," he said, extending his hand. She took it, her grip firm despite her injuries. "Partners." Outside, the crowd began to count down from 60, their voices joining in a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat, like drums, like the approaching footsteps of death itself. But in that moment, in that small cabin on a lonely ranch, 2 people stood ready to refuse the world's casual cruelty. And that refusal, Eli thought as he positioned himself at the window, was worth whatever came next. The countdown reached 30. Sahaley began placing the dynamite, strategic and calm. 20. Eli saw riders circling to flank them. 10. The crowd's roar grew louder. 5. Sahaley pressed something into his hand, a second page, from the surveyor's ledger, one she'd kept hidden. "In case one of us makes it," she whispered. 1. The silence that followed was deafening, and then Sheriff Brackett's voice cut through it like a blade. "Burn them out." The first torch arced through the air, trailing smoke and purpose, and the siege of Eli Mercer's ranch began in earnest. But as flames caught the dry grass and the mob surged forward, something else was beginning too, a reckoning that would shake Ash Mesa to its foundations, though neither Eli nor Sahaley could know that yet. All they knew was the simple truth that had brought them together. Some things were worth refusing, even if refusal cost everything. In the distance, unnoticed by the mob, a lone rider sat on a ridge, watching through field glasses. Caleb Brackett had come to see his brother's work, but what he saw instead was something he hadn't expected: genuine resistance, the kind that could spread like wildfire if not properly contained. He lowered the field glasses and smiled. It had been too long since he'd had a real challenge. Below, the first explosion shook the earth as Sahaley's carefully placed dynamite found its mark, and the war for Ash Mesa truly began. The explosion's echo rolled across the valley like thunder, sending horses rearing and men diving for cover. Eli watched through the smoke as 3 of Brackett's men scrambled away from the crater where the fence line used to be, their confidence shattered along with the wooden posts. Sahaley had placed that first charge perfectly, creating chaos without casualties yet. That got their attention, she said, her voice stronger now, despite the purple bruising around her throat. She was already moving to the next window, checking angles, counting men. The Apache warrior in her had fully awakened, replacing the condemned girl from the hanging tree. Through the dissipating dust, Eli caught a glint of reflected sunlight from the ridge glass, definitely field glasses, or maybe a scope. Someone was watching this play out from a safe distance, someone who didn't want to be part of the mob but needed to see the outcome. "We've got an observer," he told Sahel, pointing to the ridge. 2 o'clock high, about 400 yards. She studied the position with narrowed eyes. "Not one of Brackett's regulars. They're all down here trying to grow spines." A ghost of a smile crossed her damaged features. "Maybe someone who matters is paying attention." The wind shifted, then hot and dry from the east, carrying the smell of sage and something else, smoke from the torches that had started spot fires in the dry grass around the cabin. Fire weather, the kind that could turn a small blaze into an inferno, if not watched carefully. Sheriff Brackett's voice carried across the chaos. Surround the cabin, no one gets out. But Eli was already moving, pulling up the floorboards in the kitchen to reveal more of his cache. 8 years of paranoid preparation, of telling himself he was just being cautious, and now every hidden weapon and trap seemed like prophecy. Jesus, Saheli breathed, looking at the organized arsenal below. You were expecting a war. I was expecting to die alone, Eli corrected, pulling up boxes of ammunition, old but still good. This is better. She looked at him strangely, then this woman he'd known for less than a day, and something passed between them, an understanding that neither of them had expected to find another soul who understood the weight of carrying death in their hands. The next wave came from the south. 5 men moving low through the grass, using the smoke as cover. Eli tracked them through his rifle sights, but held fire. Not yet. Let them commit to their approach. Wire, Sahel said, suddenly pointing to the roll he'd bought in town. You have fence wire and blasting caps. She was already thinking ahead, seeing possibilities he'd missed. Working together, they strung wire between the remaining fence posts, creating invisible barriers at chest height. Each wire got a blasting cap and a small charge. Not enough to kill necessarily, but enough to make men think twice about charging blindly through smoke. The dog barking started then, not from town, but from his own barn. Eli's old hound Reb, who usually slept through everything, was raising hell about something, or someone. They're trying to flank us through the barn, Eli muttered, doing quick calculations. 20 men visible out front, maybe another 10 circling to cut off escape routes. The math wasn't good, but it rarely was in situations worth standing for. The first torch sailed through the air, a burning brand that landed in the dry grass near the corral. Eli watched it catch, watched the flames begin their slow crawl toward the hay stores. Every instinct screamed at him to run out and stop it, that hay would see his horses through winter, but that's what they wanted, to draw him out. Let it burn, Sahel said quietly, reading his tension. Fire's just another tool if you use it right. She was right. The smoke would provide cover and the wind would carry it toward Brackett's men, not the cabin. Still watching his carefully built life begin to burn piece by piece stirred something cold in his chest. Movement, Sahela hissed, pointing to the tree line. 6, maybe 7 men. The firelight was working against the attackers, now silhouetting them against the flames. Eli counted heartbeats, waiting for the right moment, then squeezed off 3 shots in rapid succession. He wasn't aiming to kill, not yet, just to remind them that this wouldn't be easy. Return fire peppered the cabin walls, splinters flying as bullets chewed through the logs. Martha had helped him build these walls, insisting on making them thicker than necessary. Never know when we might need a fortress, she'd said, laughing. She couldn't have known how right she'd be. Cooper, Brackett's voice again, using Eli's old name like a weapon. I know who you are, the range war detective who went soft. You think these people will protect you when they find out how many men you've killed? Eli didn't respond, but Sahale looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. How many? She asked simply. 43, he answered without hesitation. 43 men who needed killing until I killed one who didn't. Then I stopped. She nodded, accepting this piece of his history as easily as she'd accepted his protection. Mine's 17, she said, all in the last 5 years, all Brackett men who thought an Apache woman alone was easy prey. The next rush came from 2 directions at once, coordinated and aggressive. Eli took the east window while Sahel covered west, their rifles creating a crossfire that sent men scrambling for cover. One of them hit a wire, the blasting cap detonating with a sharp crack that sent the man tumbling, clutching his chest where the wire had caught him. That's Harlan, someone shouted. The son of a bitch booby-trapped his own land. And let them think about that, Eli thought. Let them wonder what else was waiting in the grass and shadows. Fear was almost as good as bullets for keeping men at bay. A whiskey bottle sailed through the air stuffed with burning cloth, a primitive firebomb that shattered against the porch, spreading flames across the wooden planks. Then another and another. They were trying to burn them out in earnest now. "Time to return the favor," Sahaley said, pulling out one of the dynamite sticks. She lit the fuse with disturbing casualness, counted to 3, then lobbed it through the window in a perfect arc. The explosion sent men flying, not dead, but definitely reconsidering their life choices. Through the smoke and chaos that glint on the ridge remained steady. Their watcher hadn't moved, hadn't fled when the violence started. If anything, they'd moved closer, finding a better vantage point. "Deputy coming in under a white flag." The voice was younger, nervous. "Just want to talk." Eli recognized him, Patterson, barely 20, wearing a badge his mother had pinned on him with pride not 3 months ago. The boy approached slowly, hands visible, clearly terrified but trying to hide it. "That's close enough," Eli called out when Patterson reached the ruined fence line. "Sheriff says—" The boy swallowed hard, starting over. "Sheriff says this can end peaceful. Just send out the Apache woman. You can go back to your life, Mr. Mercer. No one needs to die over a horse thief. Ask him about Barnes." Sahaley called out, her damaged voice carrying surprising authority. "Ask your sheriff what happened to the federal surveyor." Patterson's face went pale. That's not— "You were there," Sahaley continued, relentless. 2 weeks ago, you held the horses while they did it. Didn't you wonder why a federal man needed to disappear?" The young deputy looked like he might vomit. His hand moved to his pocket, pulling out something small, a piece of paper folded and worn. "I found this," he said quietly, so quietly only Eli could hear. "In the preacher's office. It's a ledger entry about land titles and bodies." Before Eli could respond, a shot cracked from behind Patterson. The boy spun and fell, blood spreading across his back. Sheriff Brackett lowered his rifle, his face stone. "Deserters get what cowards deserve," the sheriff announced. "Anyone else want to develop a conscience?" The dying deputy tried to crawl toward the cabin, toward some kind of redemption, but his strength gave out halfway. The paper fluttered from his hand, caught by the wind, and Sahaley made a decision that should have killed her. She broke from cover, sprinting into the open to snatch the paper before the wind could carry it to the flames. 3 rifles swung toward her. Eli didn't think, just acted, laying down, covering fire that sent shooters diving. Sahaley rolled, came up running, and dove through the cabin door as bullets chewed the ground where she'd been. "That was stupid," Eli said. "That was necessary," she countered, showing him the ledger entry. It was damning. Payments, recorded land transfers noted, and at the bottom a list of names marked "resolved," which was apparently how they recorded murders in their books. The fire had reached the barn now, and Eli could hear his horses screaming. He'd left the back stalls open, giving them a chance to flee, but it still tore at him to hear their panic. Everything he'd built in 8 years of solitude was turning to ash, and all for a woman he'd met yesterday, and a truth that might die with them. But then he thought about Patterson dying in the dirt for trying to do right, and the choice became clear. Some things were worth the burning. "They're massing for a real push," Sahaley observed, watching through a crack in the wall. 30 men, maybe more. They'll come all at once, except the casualties. Eli looked at his remaining ammunition, at the dynamite, at this Apache woman who'd given him a reason to fight. "Then we make the casualties unacceptable." He pulled up more floorboards, revealing the last of his secrets. A box of nitroglycerin bottles, old and unstable. The kind that would go off if you looked at them wrong. He'd kept them out of paranoia, telling himself he'd dispose of them safely someday. Someday had arrived. "This is insane," Sahaley said, but she was smiling, the kind of smile warriors wore when they knew the end was coming and decided to meet it with style. "Probably," Eli agreed carefully, placing the bottles at strategic points, windows, doorways, anywhere men might cluster. "But sanity's overrated." The attack came with the sunset, the dying light, turning everything red as blood. They came from all sides, Brackett's men mixed with townspeople who'd been promised Apache scalp money. The first wave hit Eli's wires, explosions and screams filling the air. The second wave learned staying low, but that brought them into range of Saheli's deadly, accurate rifle work. "Magazine's empty," she called out. "Cabinet top shelf," Eli responded, squeezing off his own shots, making each one count. A man fell from the roof. When had they gotten on the roof? And Eli realized they were running out of time and options. That's when the water trough exploded. Neither of them had rigged it, but suddenly water was everywhere, creating a cloud of steam that mixed with the smoke. Through the chaos, Eli saw him, a lone rider, coming hard from the ridge rifle, firing with mechanical precision, dropping Brackett's men like wheat before a scythe. The rider wore black like the sheriff, but moved with a deadlier purpose. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who'd never been denied. "Stand down," the rider commanded. "Everyone stand down now." The shooting stuttered to a stop, men looking confused, waiting for Sheriff Brackett to give orders. But the sheriff was staring at the newcomer with something that looked like fear. "Caleb," Brackett said, "brother, this isn't your concern. Everything in this county is my concern," Caleb Brackett said, dismounting with fluid grace. He was older than the sheriff, harder, with eyes that had seen too much and decided to see more anyway. "You made it my concern when you failed to handle a simple hanging." He walked through the battlefield like he owned it, which, in a way, he did. Men stepped aside, even the wounded crawling out of his path. He stopped at Patterson's body, nudging it with his boot. "Shooting your own deputies now, brother, that's poor leadership." "He was a traitor. He was a weak link," Caleb corrected, "which you should have identified before pinning a badge on him." His gaze swept over the burning ranch, the cratered earth, the scattered bodies. "This was supposed to be quiet, clean. Now we have dead townspeople, a burned ranch, and enough witnesses to hang us all." Sheriff Brackett's face flushed red. "We can still—" "No." Caleb cut him off. "We do this my way now." He turned toward the cabin, his voice carrying clearly. "Mr. Cooper, or do you prefer Mercer? Either way, I believe we should talk. You have something we want. We have something you want, namely the ability to leave here alive. Shall we be civilized about this?" Eli looked at Sahel, saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. Caleb Brackett was the real power here, always had been. His brother was just the public face, the badge that made it legal. But Caleb was the kind of man who'd brand a woman's palm just to prove he could. "No deals," Eli called out. "Not with men who hang innocent women and shoot their own deputies." Caleb laughed, a sound like winter wind. "Innocent, Mr. Mercer, that Apache killed 6 of my men over the years. She's many things, but innocent isn't one of them." He paused. "Of course, my men were trying to rape her at the time, so perhaps we could call it self-defense. The law's funny about these things, isn't it?" The casual admission of his men's crimes, the easy way he discussed rape and murder, told Eli everything he needed to know. Caleb Brackett wasn't just dangerous, he was the kind of dangerous that wore a suit and made evil look reasonable. "Here's what happens now," Caleb continued. "You have documents, ledger pages that could cause complications. You'll give them to me. In exchange, you both ride out of here, today. Never come back, never speak of this, and live whatever lives you can build elsewhere. And if we refuse," Saheli's voice carried through the window, raw but defiant, "then I'll demonstrate why even the Apache used to call me the White Devil during the range wars." Caleb's smile was visible even at distance. "I earned that name, woman, every syllable of it." The barn roof collapsed then, sending a column of sparks into the darkening sky. The fire had consumed everything: hay tools, 8 years of accumulated life. All that remained was the cabin, 2 people inside it, and a choice between surrender and annihilation. But Eli had already lost everything once when Martha died. Losing it again didn't scare him. What scared him was the thought of evil men like the Bracketts continuing their reign unopposed, and unpunished. "We need time to discuss it," Eli called out. "You have 10 minutes, Caleb replied. "Then I come in personally, and trust me, Mr. Mercer, you don't want that." As Brackett's men maintained their circle weapons trained on every exit, Eli and Sahaley huddled in the smoke-filled cabin. The ledger pages lay between them, evidence that could bring down half the county's power structure, or just 2 more pieces of paper to burn with everything else. "He'll kill us anyway," Sahaley said quietly. "Soon as we hand over the evidence, men like him don't leave witnesses." "I know," Eli replied, "but he also doesn't know we have nitroglycerin. One wrong move and this whole cabin becomes a crater." She looked at him with those dark, fierce eyes. "You'd do that, die, to take them with us. 8 years ago I wouldn't have. 8 years ago I'd have taken his deal and run." He met her gaze steadily. "But you were right. Some things you refuse, even if refusal costs everything." Outside, they could hear Caleb organizing his men, positioning them for a final assault. The older Brackett brother was done with negotiation. He'd made his offer for form's sake, but violence was always his preference. "There's another way," Sahaley said suddenly. She pulled out a pencil and started writing on the back of one of the ledger pages, working quickly. "We make copies, hide them. Even if we die, the truth survives." It was desperate, probably futile, but it was action rather than waiting. They worked together, Eli copying one page while Sahaley handled another, their hands steady despite the approaching death. The original Barnes had been careful, thorough names, dates, amounts enough to hang them all if it reached the right authorities. 5 minutes, Caleb called out. Eli looked around the cabin, this place where he'd hidden from the world for 8 years, hidden from his guilt over Martha, from his past as Cooper, the range detective, from the weight of 43 souls on his conscience. But hiding hadn't brought peace, just a different kind of dying, slow, quiet, alone. "Whatever happens," he told Sahaley, "I'm glad you're here, glad I'm not facing this alone." She reached out, touched his hand briefly. "Partners," she said simply. "Time's up." Caleb's voice was closer now, moving toward the cabin with deadly purpose. "Coming in." That's when they heard it, distant but unmistakable, the sound of many horses. Not from town, but from the north, from the direction of the territorial capital. The thunder of what sounded like a full cavalry unit riding hard. "Federal Marshals!" someone shouted. "It's the goddamned Federal Marshals!" The effect was immediate. Half of Brackett's men broke and ran, knowing that federal authority trumped county badges. Others stood frozen, unsure whether to fight or flee. Sheriff Brackett was screaming orders that no one was following, but Caleb Brackett just stood there looking at the approaching dust cloud with an expression of mild annoyance. "Well," he said to no one in particular, "this is unexpected." Through the window, Eli saw the lead riders, 20 federal marshals in formation badges glinting in the last light of day. And at their head, wearing a deputy marshal's star, rode someone Eli recognized with shock. Mary Patterson, the dead deputy's mother, her face set in lines of grief and rage. "Sheriff Brackett," the lead marshal called out, "you're under arrest for the murder of federal surveyor William Barnes. Throw down your weapons." The sheriff looked at his brother, panic in his eyes. But Caleb was already moving smooth as silk, mounting his horse with unhurried grace. "This isn't over," he called to the cabin. "Not by half." Then he was gone, spurring his horse into the darkness, leaving his brother to face the federal law alone. Sheriff Brackett stood there abandoned, watching his carefully built kingdom crumble in minutes. "It was Caleb!" the sheriff shouted desperately. "Everything was Caleb's idea. I have proof, I can testify." But Mary Patterson had already dismounted, walking toward the man who'd shot her son. She didn't speak, didn't hurry, just walked with the inevitable purpose of a mother's vengeance. When she reached him, her fist connected with his jaw hard enough to drop him. "That's for Bobby," she said quietly. Then louder to the marshals, "This man shot my son in the back for trying to do right. I want him hanged legal and proper." The federal marshal, a weathered man named Carson, looked at the burning ranch, the bodies, the destruction. What in hell happened here? Eli emerged from the cabin, Sahale beside him, both carrying the ledger pages. Justice, he said simply, or at least the attempt at it. Carson took the papers, scanning them quickly, his expression darkening with each line. Jesus Christ, this implicates half the county leadership. The preacher's in on it too, Sahale added, her voice rough but clear. Check his office. You'll find more evidence. As the marshals rounded up the remaining bracket men, Mary Patterson approached Eli and Sahale. Her eyes were red with tears, but her voice was steady. Bobby sent me a telegram yesterday, she said, before the hanging, said if anything happened to him, I should bring the marshals here fast as possible. Said an innocent woman was about to die and a good man was going to try to stop it. She looked at Sahale. You're the woman, Sahale nodded, and you're the good man. This to Eli. I tried to be, Eli said. Mary reached into her pocket, pulling out a deputy's star, Bobby's star, blood still on it. He would have wanted someone worthy to wear this, someone who stands up when it matters. Eli started to refuse, but Sahale's hand on his arm stopped him. Take it, she said quietly. For Patterson, for Martha, for all the ones who can't stand up anymore. He took the star, feeling its weight, remembering another badge from another life. But this was different. This wasn't about law or authority. It was about remembering a young man who died trying to do right. The ranch was still burning as the marshals led Sheriff Brackett away in chains. The barn was gone, the fences destroyed, 8 years of building reduced to ash and memory. But Eli found he didn't care. The isolation he'd built hadn't been a life. It had been a slow death, a penance that helped no one. Where will you go? He asked Sahale as they stood watching the flames. North, she said. There's a band of my people in the mountains. They need to know about Caleb Brackett, need to be ready. She paused. You could come. A man with your skills would be welcome. Eli considered it a new life, a new purpose, standing with people who understood the cost of refusal. But then he looked at the deputy's star in his hand, at Mary Patterson organizing the federal response with fierce efficiency at the work still to be done. Maybe someday, he said, but there's cleaning up to do here first. Caleb's still out there, and he's got roots all through this territory. Someone needs to dig them out. Sahale nodded, understanding. They'd been partners for exactly 1 day, but it had been enough to change both their trajectories. She started to leave, then turned back. That ledger page I kept, she said, pulling it from her shirt. I'm taking it north. Insurance in case Caleb tries to bury this. The tribes have long memories. We'll remember what happened here. Good, Eli said. Memory's important. It's forgetting that lets men like the Bracketts flourish. She mounted one of the horses the marshals had brought, looking down at him with something that might have been respect, or might have been farewell. Try not to be alone so long this time, she said. It doesn't suit you. Then she was riding north, disappearing into the darkness, carrying her piece of the truth to safety. Eli watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then turned to face what remained of his ranch. Marshal Carson approached, careful and respectful. We'll need your full testimony, everything that happened here. You'll have it, Eli promised, every detail. And after, what'll you do when this is over? Eli looked at the star in his hand, at the burning ruins of his self-imposed exile, at the road that led both to town and away from it. For 8 years, he'd been Eli Mercer, rancher hermit, walking ghost. Before that, he'd been Cooper, the range detective, with blood on his hands. Maybe it was time to be someone new, someone who didn't hide from the world, but engaged with it, someone who remembered that standing up mattered even when standing up cost everything. After, Eli said, pinning Patterson's star to his shirt, feeling its weight like a promise. After, I think I'll try something revolutionary. What's that? Living, Eli said simply. Actually living instead of just refusing to die. The ranch burned through the night, visible for miles, a beacon that marked the end of the Brackett reign and the beginning of something else. By morning, nothing remained but ash and scorched earth, the old life completely consumed. But Eli Mercer stood in those ashes as the sun rose, no longer alone, no longer hiding, wearing a dead boy's star and carrying a living purpose. The vultures had finally gotten their meal, just not the one they'd expected. And somewhere to the north, Sahele rode toward her people, carrying truth in her saddlebags and revolution in her scarred hands. Their paths had crossed for just one day, but that day had been enough to remind them both that some refusals echo longer than any acceptance. The wind shifted again, carrying away the last of the smoke, revealing the mountains in the distance. Caleb Brackett was out there somewhere, planning his return, believing that power and fear would always triumph over courage and truth. He was wrong, though he didn't know it yet, because the rancher who'd lived alone for 8 years had remembered something in those flames, something that Sahel had shown him in her refusal to die quietly. Sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't winning or losing, but simply refusing to play by their rules. And that refusal, Eli thought as he walked toward his new life, was worth every lost plank and post of his burned sanctuary. The ranch was gone, but what it had protected, his isolation, his guilt, his slow dying, needed to burn anyway. Now there was work to do, truth to spread, and a white devil named Caleb Brackett to hunt. Eli touched the star on his chest, thinking of Patterson, of Martha, of all the ghosts that deserved better than silence. Not alone this time, he said to the ashes. Never alone again. The match touched the wire just as the first riders broke through the fence line, and the world exploded into chaos. The blast sent horses screaming sideways, their riders thrown into the dirt, as fire bloomed across the dry grass. Eli counted 2 men down, maybe dead, while 3 more scrambled for cover behind what remained of the water trough. West side. Sahele's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. She'd already moved silent as smoke, and he saw the flash of her knife before the man at the window even knew she was there. The would-be infiltrator dropped with a gurgle, and Sahele came back with his carbine, checking the load with practiced efficiency. 7 rounds, she reported, taking position at the corner where she could cover 2 approaches. Make them count. Eli squeezed off 3 shots from the porch post, deliberately spacing them, calling out numbers between each one. That's 12, 13, 14. The deception was old but effective. Let them think there were more rifles than there were more defenders, than just 2 wounded souls making their stand. A lantern sailed through the air from the north, aimed at the remaining hay pile. Eli shot it out of the sky glass, and kerosene spraying harmlessly into the dirt, but the effort exposed his position. Return fire chewed into the post, sending splinters into his cheek, drawing blood that ran warm down his jaw. You hit, Sahele called without looking away from her sector. Still breathing, he answered, which was all that mattered in moments like this. Through the smoke he saw movement, someone dragging a wounded man to cover. The injured one was trying to speak, gasping something that sounded like Carson's Crossing, before his voice faded. Eli filed the name away. Everything meant something in Caleb Brackett's world, every detail a potential key to understanding the larger game. The barn's roof beams groaned, threatening collapse, and that's when Eli spotted the secondary torch team moving along the east wall. They were good staying low, using the smoke and chaos as cover. But they'd made one mistake. They were moving predictably, following the wall line exactly. Sahel, the barn's going to... The roof came down with a sound like Judgment Day, sending a pillar of fire into the night sky. The heat washed over them even at distance, and Eli knew the powder cache hidden in the barn's belly wouldn't last long at those temperatures. They had minutes, maybe less. Time to move, he said, but Sahel was already in motion, kicking over the water trough to create a steam screen that would buy them seconds. In those seconds, she rolled to new cover, came up shooting, and put 2 rounds into the torch team before they even knew they'd been flanked. That's when Eli saw him clearly for the first time, the watcher from the ridge, now much closer, distinguished by his black coat and the way he sat his horse like he was born to it. Even at distance, even through smoke and chaos, there was something familiar about the man's posture, the tilt of his head. Cooper, the voice carried across the battlefield with command authority, not Sheriff Brackett's blustering threats, but something colder, more certain. Eli Cooper, I know you can hear me. The name hit Eli like a physical blow. No one had called him Cooper in 8 years except Sheriff Brackett, and he'd assumed that was just lucky guessing or old wanted posters. But this voice knew, really knew, and that changed everything. Who's Cooper? Sahale asked, though her tone suggested she'd already figured most of it out. A dead man, Eli replied, sighting down his rifle at the approaching rider. Someone I buried with my wife. The rider stopped just outside accurate rifle range, removing his hat in a gesture that might have been respect or mockery. The face revealed in the firelight made Eli's blood run cold. Caleb Brackett, older and harder than his brother, with eyes that had seen hell and decided to stay for the conversation. You killed my men in Sonora, Caleb called out, voice carrying easily across the burning ground. 6 good soldiers shot in the back as they slept. They were rapists and murderers hiding behind badges. Eli responded, not bothering to deny it. The Mexican government paid me to clean house, and I did. Still, Caleb said, replacing his hat with deliberate calm, a man should face his enemies head on, wouldn't you agree? Before Eli could respond, Sahale grabbed his arm. Look, she hissed, pointing to where she'd dropped one of the torch carriers. The man's saddlebag had split open, revealing papers that were scattering in the wind, but one sheet had caught against a fence post, and even at distance Eli could see official seals' survey marks. Cover me, Sahale said, and before he could object, she was moving again, swift and low, racing toward the exposed document. Caleb raised his hand, and his men held their fire, watching with interest, as Sahale snatched the paper and dove behind an overturned wagon just as the barn's powder cache finally detonated. The explosion sent burning debris across the entire compound, starting dozens of small fires that began to merge into larger ones. Impressive woman, Caleb commented, seemingly unbothered by the destruction around him. I branded her once, you know. 5 years ago, she killed 2 of my best men getting away. Should have killed you too, Eli said, keeping his rifle trained on the man. Probably, Caleb agreed. But then who would maintain order in this territory? My brother. He's a fool with a badge, nothing more. The preacher, he's useful for moving money, but lacks vision. No, Mr. Cooper, this territory needs someone with the will to shape it properly. Sahale made it back to the cabin, singed but intact, clutching the rescued paper. Her eyes were bright with discovery as she showed it to Eli, a survey map marking something called Carson's Crossing, with federal stamps and annotations about mineral rights. That's what Barnes was investigating, she said urgently. Not just the land grabs, but what's under the land. Caleb's been killing homesteaders who happen to be sitting on. A rifle shot cut her words short, the bullet passing so close to her head that it parted her hair. The shooter was good positioned on what remained of the barn's frame, but his muzzle flash had given away his position. Eli didn't hesitate, squeezing off 2 rounds that sent the sniper tumbling into the flames. The man's screams were brief but terrible, and even some of Caleb's men looked uncomfortable with the brutal necessity of it. You've lost your edge, Cooper, Caleb observed. The man I knew in Sonora would have spotted that sniper 10 minutes ago. The man you knew in Sonora was younger and dumber, Eli replied, and he didn't have anything worth protecting. And now you do. Caleb's smile was visible even through the smoke. A condemned Apache woman you met yesterday, that's what's worth dying for. Truth is, Eli said simply, truth and the chance to put you in the ground where you belong. Caleb laughed, genuine and delighted. There's the Cooper I remember, The one who executed 17 men in a single night? Because they'd sold tainted grain to reservation Indians. No trial, no mercy, just justice at the barrel of a gun. That why you're really here? Eli asked. Revenge for Sonora. Partly, but mostly because you're interfering with a commercial enterprise worth more than you can imagine. Caleb gestured at the burning landscape. There's silver under this land, Mr. Cooper, enough to make everyone involved wealthy beyond dreams. All we needed was the homesteaders gone and the federal surveyor's reports adjusted. Another wave of attackers came from the south, but these moved differently, professional coordinated using covering fire and leapfrog advances, not local thugs or deputized townspeople, but real gunmen probably brought in specially for this work. Mercenaries, Sahel identified, already adjusting her position. Mexican war veterans from the look of their tactics. She was right. These men knew their business and they were closing the distance despite the fires, despite the defensive position. Eli counted muzzle flashes, 8, maybe 9 shooters, all disciplined and determined. The first one to reach the cabin's wall lasted about 3 seconds before Sahele's knife found his throat, but the second and third were right behind, and there were only so many miracles 2 people could manufacture. That's when the steam explosion happened. The water trough Sahel had kicked over had created a pool near the burning debris, and the sudden heat caused a steam burst that temporarily blinded the advancing mercenaries. In that moment of confusion, Eli grabbed one of the nitroglycerin bottles, lobbing it into their midst with a prayer to whoever watched over fools and desperate men. The explosion was devastating, sending bodies flying, ending the coordinated assault in seconds. But Eli knew they'd just used one of their last trump cards, and Caleb knew it too. Running low on surprises, Caleb called out, still maintaining his position beyond rifle range. My brother brought 30 men, I brought 50. How many more can you kill before the mathematics catch up? Through the smoke, Eli saw them, more riders spreading out in a circle that would soon be impossible to defend against. But there was something else too, a sound carried on the wind. Hoofbeats from the north, lots of them moving fast. Company coming, Sahele said, and for the first time since the siege began, there was hope in her voice. My reinforcements, Caleb said, but even he sounded uncertain. The hoofbeats were too organized, too disciplined for hired guns or local muscle. A bugle call split the night U.S. cavalry, no mistaking it. The relief Eli felt was physical, like cool water on burned skin, but Caleb just smiled, unworried. Federal troops, he announced to his men. Stand down, but stay ready. I have documentation proving this ranch is harboring fugitives. Forged documentation, Sahele spat. Prove it, Caleb replied smoothly. Your word, an Apache who's killed 17 men against mine, a respected businessman with government contracts. The cavalry unit crested the rise, 20 men in formation, with a captain at their head. They surveyed the burning chaos with professional interest, taking in the bodies, the destroyed buildings, the armed standoff. Captain Morrison Fort Grant, the officer announced. We received word of an insurrection. Who's in charge here? I am, both Caleb and Eli said simultaneously. Morrison looked between them, then at the destruction surrounding them. Gentlemen, I'm going to need a better explanation than that. This man, Caleb said, pointing at Eli, is harboring a condemned criminal and has killed numerous deputized lawmen in her defense. I have warrants. This man, Eli countered, is running a murder ring disguised as legal land transactions. I have evidence. Morrison dismounted, his hand resting on his sidearm. Evidence talks louder than accusations. Show me what you have. Sahele stepped forward with the ledger pages and the survey map, but Caleb produced his own papers, official-looking documents with impressive seals. The captain examined both sets, his expression giving nothing away. Interesting, Morrison said finally. Mr. Brackett, these warrants are signed by your brother, the sheriff, who was arrested 2 hours ago by federal marshals for murder. The silence that followed was deafening. Caleb's composure cracked just for a second before reforming into something harder. Arrested on whose authority? He demanded. Mine, said a new voice, and through the smoke rode Mary Patterson, wearing a federal marshal's star, accompanied by a full unit of marshals. Your brother confessed everything, Caleb. Named names, provided dates, showed us where the bodies are buried. You're done. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, but 20 cavalry rifles swinging his way changed his mind. His mercenaries were already fading back professionals who knew when a job had gone bad. You have no proof connecting me to any crimes, Caleb said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Actually, Sahele said, pulling out one more piece of paper, the one she'd hidden most carefully, we do. This is your personal ledger page in your handwriting detailing payments for removing obstacles. One of those obstacles was Federal Surveyor Barnes. She'd had it all along, Eli realized. Kept it hidden even from him, insurance against this exact moment. Caleb's eyes went to the paper, recognizing his own meticulous record-keeping, the careful documentation that would hang him. Caleb Brackett, Marshal Patterson said formally, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, fraud, and treason against the United States government. Caleb looked at the forces arrayed against him. Cavalry marshals and 2 people who'd refused to die when they were supposed to. His mercenaries had melted away into the night. His brother was already in chains, and his carefully built empire was crumbling. This isn't over, he said to Eli. You know that, don't you? There are others higher up with more resources. They won't let this stand. Maybe not, Eli agreed. But you won't be around to see it. Caleb drew then faster than anyone expected from a man his age. But Eli was already moving, the instincts of Cooper, the range detective, finally fully awakened. 2 shots, so close together they sounded like one. Caleb's bullet passed through the space where Eli had been. Eli's found its mark. Caleb Brackett looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, seeming more surprised than pained. Cooper, he said, almost admiringly, still fast as ever. He toppled from his horse dead before he hit the ground, and with him died the immediate threat to Ash Mesa. But as Eli stood there, smoke in his lungs and Patterson's star on his chest, he knew Caleb had been right about one thing. This wasn't over. Mr. Mercer or Cooper, whoever you are, Captain Morrison said, we're going to need a full report. You'll have it, Eli promised, then looked at Sahele. We both will provide everything you need. She nodded, but her eyes were already looking north toward where her people waited. The job here was done, or at least this part of it, but there would be more Caleb Bracketts, more conspiracies, more innocent people needing someone to stand with them. The silver, Marshal Patterson said suddenly. If there's really silver under this land, every vulture in the territory will come for it. Let them come, Eli said, surprised to find he meant it. Some things are worth standing watch over. As the cavalry and marshals began processing the scene, arresting the surviving conspirators and documenting the evidence, Eli and Sahele found themselves standing alone by what had been the cabin. Everything was gone, walls, roof, the bed where Martha had died, the floors where he'd hidden for 8 years. Clean slate, Sahele observed. Clean slate, he agreed. Question is what gets built on it. She looked at him, then this woman who'd literally dropped into his life from a noose, who'd fought beside him without question or hesitation, who'd trusted him with everything, including her life. Something better, she said simply. Something worth the burning. The cavalry was setting up camp, the marshals organizing transport for prisoners, everyone busy with the aftermath of violence. But Eli and Sahele stood in the ashes of his old life, planning something that hadn't existed yesterday, a future uncertain but shared, built on the refusal to let evil go unchallenged. Your people still need warning about the silver, Eli said, about what's coming. They do, she agreed. You could come, help prepare them. I could, he said, or you could stay, help me root out the rest of this conspiracy. They looked at each other across the ashes, two paths, diverging, both necessary. Then Sahele smiled, that fierce expression that transformed her battered face into something magnificent. Why choose, she said. We dealt with the brackets. We can deal with whatever comes next, together or apart, but knowing someone else is fighting too. It was a partnership unlike anything Eli had known, not romance, not conventional friendship, but something forged in fire and sealed in trust. They'd found each other at the end of a rope and the beginning of a war, and that was enough. The territorial capital has a telegraph, Marshal Patterson said, approaching respectfully. I can send word ahead, make sure your testimony is heard by the right people. Do it, Eli said, and send word to the Apache reservation too. They should know one of their own helped expose this corruption. Patterson nodded, then hesitated. My son, Bobby, before he died, he said something about believing in second chances. Said everyone deserves one, even people who'd done terrible things. Your son was a good man, Eli said quietly. Better than most of us. He was 18, Patterson said, grief cracking her professional composure. 18, and trying to do right in a world that killed him for it. Then we make sure his death meant something, Sahele said firmly. We take down every last person involved in this conspiracy. Make them pay for Bobby Patterson and Barnes, and every homesteader they murdered. The marshal wiped her eyes, steel returning to her spine. Yes, she said. Yes, we do. As dawn approached, painting the mountains purple and gold, the full scope of the night's destruction became visible. The ranch was gone, completely erased, as thoroughly as if it had never existed. But the evidence had survived, the truth had been revealed, and two people who'd started as strangers had become something more. So what now? Captain Morrison asked, approaching with military precision. The army can provide protection while you rebuild if you're staying. Eli looked at Sahel, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. Wherever they went, whatever they did, the decision would be mutual. Now we finish what we started, Eli said. There's a list of names in that ledger, people who profited from murder. They need to answer for it. That could take years, Morrison warned. The corruption goes deep. Then it takes years, Sahele said simply. Some things are worth the time. Morrison studied them both, the reformed gunman wearing a dead boy's star, and the Apache woman who'd survived hanging, and something in his military bearing softened. The army will support you, he said, officially and otherwise. Men like the Brackets make all of us look bad. As the sun rose, fully burning away the last of the smoke, Eli realized that his 8 years of isolation had ended exactly as they'd begun, with death and fire and irreversible change. But this time he wasn't alone. This time the death had meaning and the fire had purpose. Ready? Sahel asked, checking her rifle with automatic precision. For what? Whatever comes next. Eli looked at the ashes of his old life, at the badge on his chest, at this fierce woman who'd given him purpose when he'd thought he had none left. The vultures were circling again, but this time they felt like an omen of change rather than death. Ready, he said, and meant it. They mounted horses the cavalry had provided, sitting tall, despite exhaustion and wounds. There was work ahead, investigations, trials, probably more violence as the conspiracy fought back. But for the first time in 8 years, Eli Mercer felt truly alive. North or south? Sahele asked, letting him choose their initial direction. Both, he said. You warn your people. I'll start with the territorial capital. We meet back here in 1 month. And then we hunt. Every name in that ledger, every person who profited from innocent blood. We hunt them all. She extended her hand and he took it, sealing a pact that would reshape the territory's future, though neither of them knew it yet. They'd started as strangers, a hermit and a condemned woman, but they'd become something more dangerous than any conspiracy could have imagined, partners with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. As they rode in opposite directions, both carrying copies of the evidence, both wearing the scars of their survival, the sun climbed higher into a clear sky. The buzzards had finally given up flying toward other opportunities, other deaths. But Eli Mercer and Sahel weren't dead. They were something worse for men like the Bracketts. They were alive, they were angry, and they were coming. The war for Ash Mesa was over. The war for the territory had just begun. The month apart had changed them both in ways that showed in their movements as they met at the ruins of Eli's ranch. Sahali rode in from the north with 2 Apache warriors flanking her, while Eli arrived from the south wearing a federal deputy's badge that caught the afternoon sun like a promise or a threat. "You look official," Sahali said, dismounting with the fluid grace that marked her as fully healed from the hanging. The bruises were gone, but she still wore high collars that hid the rope scars. "You look ready for war," Eli replied, noting the extra weapons, the tactical positioning of her companions. "Because I am." She pulled a folded paper from her saddlebag. "My people's scouts found 3 more homesteads, burned out families missing. Someone's still operating using Caleb's methods, but smarter about it." Eli felt his jaw tighten. They'd spent a month tearing apart the conspiracy, but evil was like prairie grass: burn it down, and it grew back thicker. The territorial prosecutor says the same. Half the names in that ledger have disappeared, gone to ground, or fled the territory. One of Sahali's companions, an older warrior with silver threading through his braids, spoke in Apache. Sahali translated, "He says the White Devil had a brother, not the fool sheriff, another brother, one who never shows his face but sends messages through dead men." Another Brackett. Eli's hand moved instinctively to his gun. "How many of them are there?" "This one's different," Sahali said, producing another paper. "We intercepted this at the trading post. It's addressed to you." Eli took the letter, recognizing the precise handwriting. Immediately it matched Caleb's ledger entries perfectly, but the message was new. "Mr. Cooper, you killed my brother over a misunderstanding. The land disputes could have been resolved peacefully. I propose a meeting to discuss terms. Come alone to Carson's Crossing at midnight 3 days hence. Bring the Apache woman and you both die badly. Signed, Samuel Brackett." "It's a trap," Sahali said immediately. "Obviously. But Carson's Crossing." Then Eli studied the letter again. "That name keeps coming up. Patterson's dying words, the survey maps, now this." The older Apache warrior spoke again, longer, this time his hands moving in emphasis. Sahali's expression darkened as she translated. "He knows Carson's Crossing. 20 years ago it was a sacred site where our people signed a peace treaty. The army broke it within 6 months, but the place, he says the place remembers betrayal, says the rocks themselves hold blood." "Then that's where we spring the trap," Eli decided. "But not alone and not blind." Sahali smiled, that fierce expression he'd come to recognize as her battle face. "You have a plan, the beginning of one, but first..." He noticed something different about her stance, the way she favored her left side slightly. "You're hurt." "Not hurt, marked." She pulled aside her jacket to show a fresh brand on her shoulder, the same symbol that scarred her palm, but newer, angrier. "They came for us 5 nights ago. 20 men, all wearing hoods. We killed most of them, but one got close enough." The rage that filled Eli was cold and purposeful, the kind he'd felt in Sonora when he'd found those murdered villagers. "Samuel Brackett did this. His men. They wanted us to know he could reach us anywhere." She rebuttoned her jacket with steady hands, but Eli saw the tremor in them. "My people want to ride to war, full war, the kind where no one asks questions and no one takes prisoners." "Can't say I blame them." "But that's what he wants," she continued. An Apache uprising would bring the army justify everything they've done, make them look like protectors instead of murderers. The tactical brilliance of it was sickening. Create enough violence to force military intervention, then use that same intervention to seize the disputed lands legally. The Brackets had been playing a longer game than anyone realized. "We need to be smarter," Eli said. "Turn his trap into ours." Before Sahele could respond, they heard horses approaching fast from the east. Both drew weapons but relaxed slightly when they saw Marshal Patterson leading 3 riders all wearing federal badges. "Thought I'd find you here," Patterson said, dismounting heavily. The month had aged her grief and duty wearing lines into her face. "We have a problem." "Another one?" Eli asked dryly. "Judge Harlan's been murdered, shot through his window while reviewing the Brackett case files." Patterson's voice was steady, but her eyes blazed with fury. He was going to issue federal warrants for everyone named in that ledger. The ground seemed to shift under Eli's feet. Without those warrants, their legal case crumbled. Inside job had to be. Only 4 people knew the judge was reviewing those specific files. Patterson looked at her fellow marshal's suspicion-poisoning trust. "One of us is working for Samuel Brackett." The 3 deputies spread out slightly, hands casual but ready. The older one, Morrison, spoke first. "This is horseshit, Mary. We've ridden together for years." "And Bobby trusted the sheriff," Patterson shot back. "Trust means nothing when there's enough money involved." Sahele had positioned herself strategically, able to cover all angles if violence erupted. Her Apache companions had done the same, everyone ready for the betrayal that seemed inevitable. "There's a way to prove it," Eli said slowly. "Samuel Brackett wants to meet me at Carson's Crossing. Whoever's the mole will try to ensure I go alone." "That's suicide," the youngest Deputy Harris said quickly. "Too quickly. You can't seriously be considering—" "I agree," Morrison interrupted. "It's obviously a trap. We should send a full unit surround the crossing before—" "No," the 3rd Deputy Coleman said quietly. He was a thin man with careful eyes who'd said little until now. "If Mercer wants to walk into a trap, that's his choice. We have no authority to stop him." Patterson watched her men reading their tells like a poker hand. Then she drew her pistol in one smooth motion, pointing it at Coleman. "It's you." Coleman didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. "Mary, you're upset about the judge. You're the only one who didn't try to talk him out of it," she said. "Morrison wants a full assault. Harris thinks it's suicide, but you're fine with him going alone because you know what's waiting there." Coleman's hand twitched toward his gun, but Sahele's knife was already at his throat, appearing there with supernatural speed. "Move and bleed," she said simply. "Check his pockets," Eli suggested. Morrison did, pulling out normal items until he found it, a leather pouch containing 20 gold double eagles, more money than a deputy made in 2 years. "Judas coins," Patterson said with disgust. "How long, Coleman? How long have you been selling us out?" Coleman's careful composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. Samuel Brackett owns half the territory's wealth. Fighting him is like fighting the mountain, pointless and fatal. I have a family." "So did Bobby," Patterson said quietly. "So did Judge Harlan. So did all those homesteaders buried in unmarked graves." "Where's Samuel now?" Eli demanded. "Where's he hiding?" Coleman laughed bitterly. "Hiding? He's not hiding. He's at the Prescott Grand Hotel hosting a charity ball for war widows. Half the territorial government is there drinking his champagne and making deals." The audacity of it was breathtaking. While they skulked in shadows investigating murders, Samuel Brackett was playing society patron in full view of everyone. "He's untouchable there," Morrison said. "Too many witnesses, too much security. But he'll leave for Carson's Crossing," Sahele pointed out. "Has to if he wants to kill Eli personally. Unless," Patterson said slowly, "he never planned to be there at all. Unless Carson's Crossing is just where the killing happens, not where Samuel watches from." Coleman's face confirmed it before he spoke. There's an old cavalry observation post on the ridge above the crossing. Perfect view of the whole valley. He'll watch from there while his men do the work." "How many men?" Eli pressed. 30, maybe 40. Professional killers, not local thugs. He's been recruiting from the border wars, men who've done worse than murder and sleep fine after." The numbers were bad, worse than the original siege. But knowing Samuel's real position changed everything. The hunter thinking he was safe in his blind, not knowing he'd become prey. "I need to send a telegram," Eli said suddenly, "to Fort Grant." "Morrison can—" Patterson started, then stopped. "No, trust is gone. I'll go myself." "What about him?" Harris asked, nodding at Coleman. Patterson's face was stone. "Federal custody, though if he tries to escape—" She left the threat hanging. As they prepared to separate, Sahele pulled Eli aside. "This plan you're forming, it's going to require trust. The kind we can't afford if anyone else is compromised." "I know, that's why it'll just be us at the sharp end. You, me, and whoever we can absolutely verify. My warriors will be needed, but there's something else first." He showed her the telegram he planned to send. "Captain Morrison from the cavalry. He offered support. Time to collect." She read it, then looked at him with surprise. "You're calling in the army." "That's exactly what Samuel wants." "No," Eli corrected. "Samuel wants an Apache uprising that justifies military suppression. What he's going to get is something very different." 3 days passed in preparation, messages sent through trusted channels, pieces moved into position. The night before the meeting, Eli and Sahele met at an abandoned mine shaft 5 miles from Carson's Crossing. She'd brought 6 Apache warriors. He'd brought something better, Captain Morrison, and a squad of Buffalo Soldiers, black cavalry troops who'd faced discrimination and death with equal courage. "The observation post is here," Morrison said, pointing to his map. 2 approaches the main trail and a goat path up the back face. "My men know mountains," the Apache war chief, a scarred veteran named Joseph Crow Dog, said in accented English. "We take the goat path." "While we draw attention at the crossing," Eli added. "Samuel expects me alone, but he'll have watchers. They need to see me arrive, report back. By the time they realize I'm not alone, your men will be in position." "And the 40 killers waiting in ambush?" Morrison asked. "That's where things get interesting." Sahele produced a cavalry bugle, tarnished but functional. "Your Buffalo Soldiers know the call for enemy sighted." "Yes." Morrison grinned, understanding. "1 bugle call and every military unit within 50 miles converges. Samuel can't fight the entire U.S. Army." "He won't try," Eli said. "He'll run, and when he does, we'll be waiting." Crow Dog finished his warriors, nodding agreement. The plan was dangerous, requiring perfect timing and trusting people who had every reason to distrust each other. But it was also unexpected, the kind of play Samuel wouldn't see coming, because it required cooperation between groups that historically hated each other. As they finalized details, a rider approached Marshal Patterson alone, carrying a shotgun and wearing the expression of someone with nothing left to lose. "Coleman's dead," she announced. "Killed himself in his cell, left a note naming 6 other corrupted officials." "Convenient," Sahele said suspiciously. "Or honest," Patterson countered. "His family received a package this morning, $50,000 and a note saying, 'For your silence.' Coleman knew they'd be killed if he testified." Samuel's cleaning house, Eli realized, removing anyone who could implicate him. "Which means after tomorrow night, we might be the only ones left who know the truth," Morrison pointed out. "Then we'd better survive," Eli said simply. The night deepened around them, stars emerging like bullet holes in black cloth. Tomorrow would bring violence and perhaps death. But for tonight, this unlikely alliance held Apache warriors, Buffalo Soldiers, federal marshals, and 2 people who'd found purpose in each other's refusal to surrender. "There's something else," Patterson said quietly. I've been investigating Samuel Brackett. He's not just another corrupt businessman. During the war, he ran a prison camp, the kind where prisoners went in, but records of them disappeared. He's a war criminal, Morrison asked. Worse, he perfected systems for making people vanish while keeping everything looking legal. Death certificates for men who were sold to mines, women who ended up in border brothels. He turned human suffering into science. The revelation cast new shadows over their mission. This wasn't just about land grabs anymore, it was about stopping someone who'd industrialized evil. All the more reason to end him, Crowdog said firmly. Legally, Patterson insisted. We do this by the book or we're no better than him. Your book hasn't worked so far, Saheli pointed out. Because we haven't had the right chapter, Eli said. Tomorrow we write a new one. As the group dispersed to their positions, Saheli lingered with Eli. You know this could go wrong 20 different ways. 25, actually. I counted. She smiled, that fierce expression that had first caught his attention at the hanging tree. You've changed. Month ago, you'd have counted 50 ways to fail. Month ago, I was alone, he replied. Makes a difference having something to fight for besides revenge. Is that what I am? Something to fight for. He met her eyes directly. You're someone to fight beside. That's rarer and worth more. She nodded, accepting this truth between them. They weren't lovers, might never be, but they were something perhaps more valuable partners who'd chosen each other in full knowledge of the costs. If we die tomorrow, she started. We won't. But if we do, Eli considered the question. Then we die standing together, having refused to let evil win easy. There are worse endings. And better ones, she countered. Ones where we live to fight other battles. Those too, he agreed. But tomorrow decides which story we get. As midnight approached, they took their positions. Eli would approach Carson's Crossing openly, the bait in his own trap. Saheli would shadow him invisible in the darkness. The Apache warriors were already climbing toward the observation post. The buffalo soldiers waited in reserve, ready to ride when the bugle called. The chessboard was set, the pieces in motion. All that remained was to see who played the game better. Samuel Brackett with his money and influence and carefully orchestrated evil, or a group of damaged people who'd found strength in their shared refusal to surrender. In the distance, a wolf howled long and mournful. Others answered a chorus that spoke of hunt and hunger and ancient purposes. Eli touched the badge on his chest, not Patterson's anymore, but his own, earned through blood and fire, and prepared to walk into what everyone knew was a trap. But Samuel Brackett had made one crucial error. He'd assumed Eli would come as Cooper, the lone gunman seeking revenge. He hadn't considered that Eli might come as something else, a man who'd remembered what it meant to trust, to stand with others, to fight for more than personal satisfaction. That miscalculation would cost him everything, though only tomorrow would tell the price in blood. Carson's Crossing waited in the darkness, a place of betrayal about to host another, though this time the betrayal would run in unexpected directions. As Eli began his ride toward almost certain death, he heard Saheli moving parallel through the brush, heard the distant whisper of Apache warriors climbing stone, heard the nervous stamps of cavalry horses waiting for their moment. He wasn't alone. After 8 years of isolation, that simple fact meant more than all the strategic advantages in the world. Whatever happened at Carson's Crossing, he wouldn't face it by himself. The moon rose, painting the desert silver and black, and Eli rode toward his appointment with Samuel Brackett, carrying death in his holsters and hope in his heart. The moon hung low over Carson's Crossing as Eli approached the ancient meeting ground, his horse's hooves echoing off the red rocks that had witnessed the Apache Treaty signing 20 years ago. The place felt heavy with old ghosts, old betrayals, and now it would add new ones to its collection. Through the corner of his eye, he caught Sahele's shadow, moving between the boulders, her presence invisible to anyone who didn't know to look. The crossing itself was nothing special. a shallow ford where two dried creek beds met, surrounded by towering rock formations that created a natural amphitheater, perfect for an ambush, which was exactly why Samuel Brackett had chosen it. What Samuel didn't know was that Eli was counting on that predictability. A figure emerged from behind a massive cottonwood, hands raised in mock surrender. Not Samuel, too young, too nervous. One of his lieutenants, probably tasked with confirming Eli, came alone. "Mr. Cooper," the man called out, voice carrying in the still air. "Mr. Brackett sends his regards. He wants to ensure you've followed instructions." "I'm here," Eli replied, keeping his hands visible but ready. "Where's Samuel?" "Watching. He'll show himself when he's satisfied you're alone." Eli dismounted slowly, making a show of looking around. "Seems I held up my end. Time for him to hold up his." The lieutenant whistled sharp and clear, and suddenly the shadows came alive with movement. 20 men, maybe more, emerged from concealed positions, all armed, all focused on Eli. The trap had been sprung exactly as expected. "Here's the thing, Cooper," the lieutenant said, growing more confident now that the odds were clear. "Mr. Brackett never intended to negotiate. This is an execution, pure and simple." "Figured as much," Eli admitted, his calm response clearly unsettling the younger man. "Question is whose execution?" Before the lieutenant could respond, a pebble clattered down from the ridge above. Just one small stone, but it might as well have been thunder for how every gun swung toward the sound. That's when they heard it, the soft whisper of Apache war cries coming from multiple directions. "You brought the savages," the lieutenant snarled, but there was fear now underneath the anger. "I brought justice," Eli corrected. "Your boss brought the savages, men who'd burn out families for profit." The first scream came from the observation post, high and terrible, cut short by something final. Samuel's watchers were discovering that Apache warriors who'd survived 20 years of genocide didn't take kindly to branded women and murdered families. "Kill him!" the lieutenant shouted, but his men were already breaking formation, unsure whether to focus on Eli or the threats in the darkness. That's when Sahele struck her rifle, speaking twice from concealment, dropping the two men closest to Eli. The night erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes, creating a deadly lightning storm. Eli dove behind a boulder, feeling chips of stone pepper his face as bullets sought his life. Through the chaos, he heard it, the cavalry bugle, clear and urgent, calling out the signal for enemy contact. Within minutes, every military patrol in 50 miles would be converging on this position. Samuel's men heard it too, understood what it meant. Fighting Eli Cooper was one thing. Fighting the U.S. Army was suicide. "Pull back," someone shouted. "It's a trap." But pull back to where the Apache had the high ground. The cavalry was coming, and Sahele was picking off anyone who tried to flee across open ground. The hunters had become the hunted, and panic was spreading like wildfire through their ranks. Eli used the confusion to advance, moving from cover to cover, his pistol, finding targets with the deadly accuracy that had made Cooper's name feared from Texas to California. A man rushed him from the left down. Another tried to flank from the right, the sound of Sahele's rifle, and another body hitting dirt. That's when he saw him. Samuel Brackett trying to escape down a narrow trail between two rock formations, accompanied by 3 bodyguards. Unlike his brother Caleb's arrogant confidence, Samuel moved like a man who'd survived by knowing when to run. "Brackett," Eli called out, pursuing. Samuel turned, and in the moonlight, Eli saw a face that could have been carved from winter cold, calculating utterly without conscience. "Cooper, I should have known you'd make this complicated." "Complicated?" Eli kept advancing, noting how Samuel's bodyguards were positioning themselves. "You murdered families, branded women. That's not complicated, that's evil." "It's business," Samuel replied, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone discussing grain prices. "This territory needs development. Progress requires sacrifice." "Whose sacrifice? Not yours, apparently." Samuel actually smiled at that. "The successful never sacrifice. They orchestrate the sacrifices of others. You should understand that you killed 43 men in your career. 44 now, Eli said, raising his pistol. But Samuel was already moving, diving behind cover as his bodyguards opened fire. Eli felt a bullet crease his ribs, another punch through his jacket. He fired back, dropping one guard, but the others were good professional, keeping him pinned. Then Sahel was there, appearing like smoke from the shadows. Her knife took the second guard in the throat, while her pistol put a hole through the third's chest. It happened so fast that Samuel, scrambling for his fallen guard's rifle, barely had time to process the reversal. "Don't!" Sahel warned, her gun trained on him. "I've been wanting to kill you slowly since you branded me. Give me the excuse." Samuel froze, hands inches from the weapon, calculating odds. In the distance, the sound of cavalry horses was getting closer, mixed with continued gunfire as the Apache warriors and Samuel's remaining men fought their desperate battle. "You think you've won?" Samuel asked, straightening slowly. "I have judges, senators, even a territorial governor in my pocket. You can't kill corruption with bullets." "Maybe not," Eli agreed, moving to flank him. "But we can make it bleed, make it hurt, make it cost more than it's worth." "And then what? Another man takes my place. Another conspiracy forms." Samuel's laugh was bitter. "You're fighting human nature itself." "No," Sahel said firmly. "We're fighting men who choose evil. That's different." The sound of approaching horses was louder now, definitely military, from the disciplined rhythm. Samuel's eyes darted between his captors, looking for an angle, an escape, anything. "There's 50,000 in gold in my saddlebags," he offered. "Take it, leave the territory, live well somewhere else." "Like your brother suggested?" Eli asked. "Before I shot him." Samuel's composure finally cracked. "Caleb was a fool. Direct action, direct consequences. I'm subtler. I make problems disappear legally, quietly. No martyrs, no heroes, just paperwork and shallow graves." "Like the prison camps," Eli said quietly. "During the war." That stopped Samuel cold. "You've done your research." "Marshal Patterson did. Found records of 3,000 prisoners who entered your camp. Only 600 officially left. Where did the others go?" Samuel's smile returned, cold and terrible. "Where all resources go, to the highest bidder. The mines needed labor, the railroads needed workers. I provided both. You sold American soldiers as slaves. I maximized resource utilization during wartime. The government gave me a medal for efficiency." The casual monstrosity of it, the way he discussed human trafficking like a grain shipment, made Eli's trigger finger itch. But Sahele was right. They needed him alive, needed him to testify, needed the whole corrupt system exposed. Captain Morrison's cavalry unit thundered into the crossing buffalo soldiers, spreading out with practiced efficiency. The captain himself rode straight to them, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Mr. Mercer, Ms. Sahel, I see you've apprehended Mr. Brackett." "Captain," Samuel said smoothly, trying to regain control. "These two attacked a peaceful meeting. My men were defending. Your men are mostly dead or captured." Morrison cut him off. "The Apache warriors were quite thorough, and we found interesting documents at your observation post." Crow Dog emerged from the darkness carrying a leather satchel. "The White Devil kept records," he said, in accented English. "Names, payments, murders, all written down like he was proud." Samuel's face went pale. He'd made the same mistake as his brother, keeping meticulous records of his crimes, unable to resist documenting his own cleverness. "Samuel Brackett," Marshal Patterson said, arriving with the federal contingent, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, human trafficking, and treason. You can't prove. Actually, we can." Patterson produced a telegram. "Coleman didn't kill himself. We faked his death to protect him. He's been in federal custody telling us everything. Names, dates, methods. You're finished." The revelation hit Samuel like a physical blow. His legs gave out and he sank to his knees in the dust of Carson's Crossing. the same ground where the Apache had signed their betrayed treaty 20 years ago. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "My associates are being arrested as we speak," Patterson informed him. "Simultaneous raids across 3 territories. Your network is done." As the marshals chained Samuel Brackett, Eli felt something he hadn't experienced in years: completion. Not satisfaction exactly, but the sense of a job properly finished. The Brackett brothers were done, their conspiracy shattered, their victims at least partially avenged. But there was still one piece missing. "The land," Sahele said, as if reading his thoughts. "The silver deposits. They're still there." Morrison nodded. "The Army will secure the area until proper surveys can be done. The Apache Treaty from 20 years ago might still have legal standing. This was supposed to be reservation land." "You mean—" Crow Dog's eyes widened with possibility. "I mean the silver might legally belong to the Apache Nation. That'll take lawyers and time, but—" Morrison smiled. "Wouldn't that be justice? The very wealth the Bracketts killed for going to the people they tried to destroy." The poetry of it was perfect. Eli looked at Sahele, saw his own thoughts reflected, not just justice, but transformation, turning tools of oppression into instruments of restitution. As dawn began to paint the eastern mountains purple and gold, the survivors gathered at the crossing. The Apache warriors, the Buffalo soldiers, the federal marshals, all standing together on ground that had seen too much betrayal, finally witnessing something like justice. "Where will you go now?" Patterson asked Eli. "The territorial governor wants to offer you a permanent position, full marshal status, your pick of assignments." Eli considered it, then looked at Sahele. She was watching the sunrise, her face unreadable but somehow peaceful. The bruises from the hanging were long gone, but she still touched her throat, sometimes remembering. "I need to rebuild my ranch first," Eli said. 8 years of hiding, then burning it all down. I need to build something new, something better." "And you?" Patterson asked Sahele. "My people need to know what happened here, need to prepare for the legal battles ahead." She paused. "But after that, she's got standing offer of federal employment too," Patterson said. "If she wants it, God knows we need people who can't be bought or intimidated." Sahele smiled, that fierce expression that had first caught Eli's attention at the hanging tree. "Maybe I'll help rebuild a ranch. Seems like that might be work worth doing." The suggestion hung in the air between them, not quite a proposal, but definitely a possibility. Partners in war considering partnership in peace. "The ranch is gone," Eli pointed out. "Nothing left but ash and scorched earth." "Good soil for new growth," Sahele countered. "My grandmother always said fire makes the grass grow greener." Crow Dog spoke in Apache and Sahele translated. "He says the warriors will help rebuild. Says a man who stands against evil deserves a strong house. And the Buffalo soldiers would be honored to assist," Morrison added. "Building something is better than destroying. We've all done enough destroying." As the sun climbed higher, warming the desert, Eli realized something had changed. The isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor for 8 years was gone, replaced by something far more powerful: connection, not just to Sahele, but to all these people who'd risked everything for justice. "There's one more thing," Patterson said, producing a small wooden box. "Bobby had this made before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to whoever took up his cause." Inside was a silver badge, not standard issue, but custom-made, engraved with a simple phrase, "Refuse to let evil win easy." "That's not regulation," Morrison observed. "Neither was anything we did here," Patterson replied. "Sometimes regulation isn't enough." Eli took the badge, feeling its weight. It was heavier than the deputy star, heavier than his old Cooper credentials. It carried the weight of expectation, of responsibility, of choosing to stand when standing was dangerous. "Help me pin it on," he asked Sahele. Her hands were steady as she fixed the badge to his shirt. right over his heart. "It suits you," she said quietly. "The man who refused to let me hang, who refused to let them win. The woman who refused to die," he replied, "who refused to break despite everything they did." They stood there for a moment, two damaged souls who'd found strength in their mutual refusal to surrender. Around them, the united forces were organizing transport for prisoners, treating wounded, beginning the long process of undoing years of corruption. "So," Sahale said finally, "this ranch we're rebuilding, what should we call it?" Eli thought about it, looking at the sunrise, painting the desert in shades of hope. "Refusal Ranch," he said, "in honor of everyone who refused to let evil win easy." "Refusal Ranch," she repeated, testing the words. "I like it. It's honest." As the convoy prepared to leave Carson's Crossing, Eli took one last look at the place. The blood had already soaked into the sand, invisible unless you knew where to look. The rock formations stood unchanged, eternal witnesses to human cruelty and courage alike. But something had shifted. The cycle of betrayal that had haunted this place for 20 years was broken. The Apache would get their justice. The murdered families would be remembered, and two people who'd started as strangers would build something new on the ashes of the old. Marshal Patterson approached one more time. "You sure about this rebuilding instead of taking the federal position?" "I've been a weapon for long enough," Eli said. "Time to try being something else." "And if evil comes calling again," Eli touched the custom badge over his heart, "then we refuse to let it win easy. But first, we build something worth defending." The convoy moved out, Samuel Brackett in chains, his surviving men under guard, the whole brutal machinery of their conspiracy grinding to a halt. But Eli and Sahale stayed behind with the Apache warriors, watching the sunrise complete its painted masterpiece across the desert. "You know," Sahale said, "when I was hanging from that tree when the world was going dark, I had one thought." "What was that?" "That I refused to have my last sight be their ugly faces. I wanted to see something beautiful one more time." She looked at him directly. "Then you cut me down, and I got to see a man choose courage over comfort. That was beautiful enough. And now I get to see what we build together. That'll be even better." They mounted their horses, the Apache warriors forming an honor guard around them. The ride back to the ruins of Eli's ranch would take most of the day, but for the first time in 8 years, he was in no hurry. The journey mattered as much as the destination. As they rode, Sahale began singing in Apache, a victory song that had been forbidden for years. The warriors joined in their voices, carrying across the desert, announcing to anyone listening that the Apache were still here, still strong, still refusing to disappear. Eli didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. It was the same refusal that had brought them all together, the same stubborn insistence that evil wouldn't win easy, that standing up mattered even when it cost everything. "Teach me the words," he asked Sahale. She smiled, that fierce, beautiful expression that had come to mean hope in the face of horror. "It says, we are still here, we are still standing, we refuse to be erased." "Good words," Eli said. "Words to build a life on." "Words to build a future on," she corrected. As they rode toward that future, toward Refusal Ranch, and whatever came next, Eli felt the last of his 8-year winter finally thawing. He'd lost everything, his ranch, his solitude, his carefully constructed isolation. But in losing it, he'd gained something infinitely more valuable: purpose, partnership, and the knowledge that some refusals echo through history. The buzzards still circled overhead, but now they seemed less like omens and more like witnesses. They'd seen the hanging that started it all, the siege that followed the justice that finally came. Now they'd watch something rarer, two warriors choosing to become builders, choosing creation over destruction. Behind them, Carson's Crossing fell silent again, returning to its eternal vigil. But the ghosts there were different now. Along with the betrayed Apache from 20 years ago, there were new spirits: Bobby Patterson, who died trying to do right, the homesteaders who'd been murdered for their land, even the Brackett brothers whose evil had finally consumed them. But strongest of all was the ghost of refusal itself, the spirit that had brought a hermit rancher and a condemned Apache woman together in defiance of everything that said they should have died quietly, separately, unmourned. They'd refused, and in refusing they'd found each other, found purpose, found a future worth fighting for. The sun climbed toward noon as they rode on, leaving the battleground behind, but carrying its lessons forward. Every scar they bore was a reminder not of pain but of survival. Every memory of violence was balanced by a moment of courage. "Hey, Eli," Sahel called out, "when we rebuild the ranch, can we make the porch bigger? I want to be able to see the sunrise properly." "We can build whatever you want," he replied. "It's our place now." "Ours," she repeated, savoring the word. I like the sound of that. So did Eli. After 8 years of mine and alone, ours sounded like redemption. The Apache warriors began another song, this one softer, about coming home after a long journey. Saheli translated in pieces phrases about finding peace after war, about seeds growing in burned earth, about the courage it took to choose hope. As they crested the final ridge before the ranch, Eli saw the devastation with fresh eyes. Everything was gone, erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. But the land remained, the water still ran clear, and the mountains still stood guard on the horizon. "It's perfect," Sahel said, surprising him. "It's destroyed." "No, it's empty. There's a difference. Empty means we can fill it with whatever we choose." She was right. The destruction had cleared away not just buildings, but the weight of the past. Martha's ghost, the guilt over 43, no 44 dead men, the crushing isolation that had nearly killed him as surely as any bullet. All of it burned away, leaving space for something new. "Where do we start?" he asked. "With a marker," Sahale said, dismounting. She pulled out a piece of wood from her saddlebag, already carved with words. "For Bobby Patterson, for the homesteaders, for everyone who refused to let evil win easy." They planted it where the cabin's door had been, driving it deep into the earth. The Apache warriors added their own marker stones, arranged in patterns that meant protection and remembrance. When they were done, the ruins didn't look like destruction anymore. They looked like a foundation. "Tomorrow we start building," Crow Dog announced. "Tonight we rest. Tonight we tell stories of victory." As the sun set on their first day of freedom from the Brackett conspiracy, Eli and Sahele sat on the scorched earth, where their new porch would be, watching the sky paint itself in shades of triumph. The Apache warriors made camp nearby, their fires bright with promise rather than threat. "No regrets?" Sahale asked. "None," Eli answered immediately. "You, just one." "What's that?" "That it took a hanging to bring us together. Would have been nice to meet under better circumstances." "Would we have noticed each other under better circumstances?" Eli asked. "I was pretty good at not seeing anything beyond my fence line. And I was pretty good at not trusting anyone without Apache blood," she admitted. "Maybe we needed the extremity. Maybe that's what it took to break us both open enough to let someone else in." It was a hard truth, but an honest one. They'd both been dying in their own ways, him of isolation, her of justified rage. The hanging and its aftermath had forced them to live, truly live, not just survive. "Eli," Sahale said, as full darkness settled over the desert, "what Bobby's mother said about everyone deserving a second chance. You believe that?" "I believe in thirds and fourths and fifths," he replied. "I believe in as many chances as it takes for someone to get it right. Even for men like the Bracketts, they had their chances. They chose to keep doing evil. That's different from making mistakes or being broken by circumstances. They chose repeatedly to hurt others for gain." Sahel nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'd hate to partner with someone who couldn't tell the difference between evil and damaged. We're all damaged, Eli pointed out. But not all evil, she countered. Damage can be repaired, evil has to be refused. As the stars emerged brilliant in the clear desert air, Eli realized this was his life now, not the isolation he'd planned, not the death he'd expected at Carson's Crossing, but this partnership with a woman as strong as she was, wounded purpose beyond mere survival, and the chance to build something that mattered. Partners, he said, extending his hand in the darkness. Partners, Sahele agreed, taking it. Their handshake became something else, their fingers intertwining, holding on. Not romantic, not yet, maybe never, but connection genuine and earned between two people who'd learned to refuse separately and were now learning to build together. The wolves howled in the distance, but it didn't sound like threat anymore. It sounded like celebration, like the desert itself, acknowledging that something significant had shifted. The reign of the brackets was over. The time of Refusal Ranch was beginning. And in that beginning, in that choice to build rather than destroy, to trust rather than isolate, Eli Mercer and Sahele found their ending not in death or separation, but in the simple revolutionary act of refusing to let their story end any way but together.